1,000 planets, 2,000 planets, 3,000 planets. In the blink of an eye, there were already more than 10,000 planets in Lin Feng's Starfell Pearl. Among them, 1,000 were stars. At this point, Lin Feng realized that firstly, the materials could not withstand it. Secondly, the spatial divine runes seemed to be insufficient. There was already not much remaining space inside, and he could not continue to transfer more planets. There were 10,000 planets with 1,000 stars among them. According to the most basic standards for 1,000 stars, that was about equivalent to a combat body of more than 1 billion kilometers. The remaining 9,000 planets were about equivalent to a combat body of 100 million kilometers. In total, they were equivalent to a combat body of more than 11 billion kilometers. Such a massive power was even stronger than Lin Feng when he had yet to undergo metamorphosis. It was equivalent to the power of a top-notch quasi-emperor. However, at this level, be it the materials or the spatial divine runes, the Starfell Pearl seemed to have reached its limit. The spatial divine runes could be inscribed again. Lin Feng had comprehended a total of 50 spatial divine runes, and there were only a few spatial divine runes engraved on the Starfell Pearl. Of course, this did not mean that the space expanded by a single spatial divine rune was fixed. It was hard to quantify. It was also possible that a single divine rune could be stronger than dozens of spatial divine runes. He could continue to inscribe spatial divine runes, but the issue of materials was a little tricky. If the materials could not withstand the energy of the 5,000 planets inside, the Starfell Pearl could not continue to increase in power. This was also one of the two conditions that limited the Starfell Pearl. Lin Feng had already expected this. The current Starfell Pearl was actually already powerful enough. How daunting was a combat body equivalent to more than 1.1 billion kilometers? If he had the Starfell Pearl back then, he wouldn't even have needed to use his combat body when facing Beta's Venerable Starfall and the Dark Venerable. All he needed to do was toss out the Starfell Pearl to strike down the target. Even the Dark Venerable probably could not withstand a single strike from the Starfell Pearl. However, Lin Feng's current opponents were all some Grand Emperors. The combat bodies of these Grand Emperors were all above 1 light-year, equivalent to more than 9.4 trillion kilometers. The Starfell Pearl was equivalent to merely a 1.1 billion kilometer combat body. It was simply a drop in the ocean compared to a Grand Emperor's combat body. In the eyes of a Grand Emperor, it could be destroyed with a flick of the finger, and was nothing much. However, speaking of materials, Lin Feng directly retrieved the new substance he had just snatched from a few Grand Emperors from the Starfell Pearl. This new substance was huge, similar to the diameter of a star. It was millions of kilometers in size. Lin Feng had never seen such a massive new substance. Even the giant flower from back then was not as huge as this new substance. The new substance looked like a tree. That's right, it was a tree. The trunk and canopy were both very massive, but there was no sign of life at all. There were faint traces of law coming from it, and it was a metallic law. The law fluctuations that Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius had sensed back then should be the law fluctuations emitted by this new substance. This is a new material. Lin Feng had seen so many new substances before. He could naturally tell at a glance that this new substance could not divide the combat body cells, but it was a precious new material. There was even a trace of chaotic aura inside. Even though there was no chaotic power, there was a chaotic aura. This meant that this new substance had been in the chaos for a very, very long time. It was even possible that it had grown in the chaos itself. Otherwise, there would not be such a chaotic aura. It grew in chaos, but there's no aura of life. Lin Feng's eyes flickered. He could not guess the origins of this new substance. The chaos was very mysterious to begin with. Apart from those universal life forms, no one had ever seen chaos. Lin Feng did not know what it was like in the chaos, nor did the other Grand Emperors. Even the Divine Kings and Divine Venerables did not know. Although he did not know the origins of this new substance, it did not stop Lin Feng from using this new substance to refine the Starfell Pearl. To be precise, it was to strengthen the Starfell Pearl. The Starfell Pearl could be strengthened continuously. As long as there were high-grade materials, the endurance of the Starfell Pearl could be constantly enhanced. For example, Lin Feng was going to extract the essence of this new material, which was millions of kilometers in size, and infuse it into the starfell pearl. Flames! Lin Feng used the flames to incinerate the new material directly. It was also very difficult to extract the essence of millions of kilometers of new substances. Lin Feng incinerated them for a few days before extracting about 1,000,000 kilometers of new substance essence. This was rather massive. Back then, Lin Feng had only refined tens of thousands of kilometers of new materials. After the final refinement of the starfell pearl, it was only a few kilometers in size. Lin Feng released the spatial divine runes on the starfell pearl. The starfell pearl quickly expanded to a few kilometers in size, then suddenly flew into the essence of the new substance. The starfell pearl began to fuse with the new substance essence in a frenzy. Buzz! The starfell pearl began to expand. It quickly grew to dozens of kilometers and continued to expand. The essence of the new substance was shrinking bit by bit, gradually shrinking from 1,000,000 kilometers to hundreds of thousands of kilometers. This was because the essence had all been infused into the starfell pearl. The process of infusing the essence of new material into the starfell pearl was very lengthy. Lin Feng did not know how long it took. Perhaps a few days, perhaps dozens of days. The fourth wave of the Big Bang had not arrived. This put Lin Feng slightly at ease. He could infuse the essence of the new material without worries. From dozens of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers, tens of thousands of kilometers, Lin Feng's starfell pearl continued to expand. The essence of the new substance this time was several times more than when Lin Feng forged the starfell pearl back then. In the end, the starfell pearl fused with most of the new substance's essence. The size of the starfell pearl was incomparably huge, and its diameter even reached 100,000 kilometers. However, Lin Feng continued to refine the starfell pearl. Traces of impurities were expelled and constantly refined. The structure of the starfell pearl also became more and more stable. When it became refined to the limit, it meant that the starfell pearl had completely stabilized. At this moment, the diameter of the starfell pearl had decreased back to 30,000 kilometers. The 30,000-kilometer starfell pearl was simply a huge planet. Although it was far inferior to stars, it was much larger than some of the most ordinary planets. Ordinary planets were only about 10,000 kilometers in size, but the starfell pearl was 3 times the size of these ordinary planets. The size of the starfell pearl did not actually matter much. After all, was there a difference between 3 kilometers and 30,000 kilometers when facing a Grand Emperor's 1 light-year combat body? The key was that the starfell pearl had been refined again and infused with a large amount of essence of the new material. How many more planets could it accommodate? Rumble. Lin Feng was about to continue capturing planets, and even capture more stars, when he sensed a terrifying power surging out from the depths of the universe. The fourth wave of the Big Bang was imminent. The fourth wave of the Big Bang? Lin Feng's expression changed abruptly. Although he already knew that the fourth wave of the Big Bang was imminent, he was delayed by refining the starfell pearl. Now that the fourth wave of the Big Bang was approaching, he was dozens of light-years away from the area of the third wave of the Big Bang, and should be hundreds of light-years away from the cosmic membrane at the end of the universe. However, the fourth wave of the Big Bang would very likely cover hundreds of light-years in range. Hence, Lin Feng did not dare to take the risk and immediately switched to the void traversal combat body. I must go. Lin Feng put away the starfell pearl. He activated the spatial divine runes on the starfell pearl, and the starfell pearl immediately shrank to the size of a baby's fist. Lin Feng swallowed it directly and stored it in his body. Then, his void traversal combat body quickly entered the spatial passage and warped space to leave directly. The fourth wave of the Big Bang was here. Looking at the mighty and terrifying shockwave in the distance, many cultivators' faces turned pale. Those who remained were basically all top-notch venerables or quasi-emperors. Apart from them, there were those grand emperors. The number of grand emperors even exceeded those top-notch venerables and quasi-emperors. The fourth wave of the Big Bang was the battlefield of the grand emperors in the first place. Just look at this terrifying impact of the Big Bang. Even after it calmed, Top-notch venerables found it difficult to move in the wave. Only a Grand Emperor's 1 light-year combat body could move freely. Hence, the fourth wave of the Big Bang was also known as the Grand Emperor's battlefield. The terrifying Grand Emperors had long opened their eyes. Their entire bodies emitted terrifying auras as they glared menacingly at the distant waves. Ha! Suddenly, Grand Emperor Scorpius saw Grand Emperor Igneous appear in the distance. However, as soon as Grand Emperor Igneous appeared, he only glanced at Grand Emperor Scorpius before leaving. He appeared to have no intention of participating in the fourth wave of the Big Bang at all. Immediately after, Grand Emperor Iridescence and Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss appeared. They did not leave, but flew towards Grand Emperor Scorpius. Grand Emperor Iridescence? Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss? How's the Grand Emperor of Annihilation? Grand Emperor Scorpius asked directly. Grand Emperor of Annihilation isn't back? Grand Emperor Scorpius shook his head. He was not worried about Lin Feng. With the law of space, Lin Feng could leave safely even in the fourth wave of the Big Bang. Grand Emperor Iridescence smiled weakly and said, Grand Emperor Scorpius, why would you be worried about Grand Emperor of Annihilation? The two of us found almost nothing in the third wave of explosions. We were really unlucky. On top of that, we also offended the Grand Emperor of Annihilation for no reason. Haha, that was to compete for new substances. It wasn't considered offending. The Grand Emperor of Annihilation wouldn't mind the two of you competing with him for new substances. Grand Emperor Scorpius also had some understanding of Lin Feng's personality. Grand Emperor Iridescence and Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss were only competing for new substances, and were not mortal enemies. Lin Feng did not even have any feud with Grand Emperor Igneous either. If not for the fact that Grand Emperor Igneous wanted to avenge Grand Emperor Gushi, Lin Feng would not have cared. By the way, what happened after? Grand Emperor Scorpius could be considered to have escaped, so he did not know what happened after. Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss shook his head and said, What else could have happened? Grand Emperor of Annihilation warped space and left directly. 3 Grand Emperors like ourselves could do nothing but watch. By the way, you've seen Grand Emperor Igneous previously, right? He left. Of course Grand Emperor Igneous has to leave. Otherwise, wouldn't he be in danger if he encounters you and Grand Emperor of Annihilation? Haha, you and Grand Emperor of Annihilation are dangerous characters now. Haven't you realized that many Grand Emperors are wary of you? Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss's words reminded Grand Emperor Scorpius. Earlier, he had sensed that some Grand Emperors were glancing at him subtly, as if they were searching for something. Now, Grand Emperor Scorpius understood that they were searching for the Grand Emperor of Annihilation. Up until now, only one Grand Emperor had fallen in the Big Bang, and that was Grand Emperor Gushi. As for Grand Emperor Gushi, he was killed by the combined forces of Grand Emperor Scorpius and Grand Emperor of Annihilation. They could even kill a Grand Emperor. How could the other Grand Emperors not pay attention to Grand Emperor Scorpius and Grand Emperor of Annihilation? The two of them had probably long been labeled dangerous in the minds of all the Grand Emperors. They had to be on guard at all times. Now that they only saw Grand Emperor Scorpius, but the Grand Emperor of Annihilation was nowhere to be found, the other Grand Emperors were all a little wary. Who knew where the Grand Emperor of Annihilation was hiding? The fourth Big Bang was a true battlefield for Grand Emperors. It was not just possible but certain that Grand Emperors would fall. Grand Emperor Scorpius, I'm quite envious of you for being able to join forces with the Grand Emperor of Annihilation. You must have gained a lot from this fourth wave of the Big Bang. Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss and Grand Emperor Iridescence were really envious of Grand Emperor Scorpius. Not everyone was so lucky as to join forces with a Grand Emperor who had comprehended the law of space. Grand Emperor Scorpius's heart also skipped a beat. Instead, he smiled weakly. Looks like I and the Grand Emperor of Annihilation have already become everyone's targets. This is not a good thing. Being the focus of attention and vigilance was definitely not a good thing. Perhaps even Grand Emperor Scorpius and Lin Feng would encounter danger. After all, although they were strong, they were not top-notch Grand Emperors. A top-notch Grand Emperor could kill an ordinary Grand Emperor with a flip of their hand. Sometimes, a reputation too great not only had no benefits, but was also a burden that would cause them to encounter many troubles. Rumble. The fourth wave of the Big Bang had finally arrived. A mighty wave swept over. All the grand emperors had solemn expressions. These grand emperors usually dominated the cosmos as the hegemons of a region. But now they were all squeezed here and fighting with their lives. Everything was for the sake of benefits. Even the divine kings, who had not showed for billions of years, had to fight, compete, and even risk their lives in the Big Bang. Mortals had their own interests, and cultivators had their own interests. No one was above it, not even grand emperors and divine kings. As the wave of the Big Bang swept over, a terrifying impact spread in all directions. However, it was not at the epicenter. Even the grand emperors could resist it. The expressions of the top venerables and quasi-emperors changed drastically, and they retreated in a frenzy. If they could not even withstand a little of the aftershock, how could they participate? This fourth Big Bang was destined to become the battlefield of the grand emperors only. Top venerables and quasi-emperors could only be spectators, and could not participate at all. Ha! Grand Emperor Scorpius, we won't wait around with you anymore. We'll go in first. Grand Emperor Iridescence and Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss actually became acquainted after their fight. They seemed to have teamed up, and were going to venture into the fourth wave of the Big Bang together. Grand Emperor Scorpius was a little hesitant. The Grand Emperors had all entered the fourth wave of the Big Bang one after another, and there were even team-ups consisting of several Grand Emperors. Seeing so many Grand Emperors joining forces, it was obvious how intense the competition for the fourth wave of the Big Bang would be. The Grand Emperor of Annihilation isn't here yet. I'll wait a little longer. Grand Emperor Scorpius frowned. He did not know what had happened to Lin Feng that he had not come after so long. It would be a pity if he missed the fourth wave of the Big Bang. Buzz. Suddenly, traces of spatial ripples appeared in the cosmos, and a figure stepped out of space. Grand Emperor Scorpius. Sorry for the wait. Grand Emperor of Annihilation. You're finally here. When Grand Emperor Scorpius saw Lin Feng, a smile appeared on his face. Although he did not believe that anything would happen to Lin Feng's continued absence still worried Grand Emperor Scorpius. And now, all his worries were unnecessary after all. Why is there no one around? Lin Feng looked around, but did not find any Grand Emperors. There were not even ordinary cultivators around. Grand Emperor of Annihilation, although the Big Bang is still ongoing, the Grand Emperors can already resist the tides. They have all entered. Oh? They've already gone in now. Lin Feng glanced at the cosmic wave. It was still sweeping majestically, and had already swept across a distance of hundreds of light years, and was constantly expanding. The fourth wave of the Big Bang seemed like it would last for a very long time. However, after the Grand Emperors avoided the brunt of the terrifying impact that could destroy the Divine Kings at the beginning, even their combat bodies as Grand Emperors could withstand this minor impact now. About how many Grand Emperors are there? I've already seen 13 Grand Emperors, perhaps more. There should be at least 20 in total. 20 Grand Emperors. Lin Feng muttered softly. With so many Grand Emperors, one could imagine how intense the competition during the fourth wave of the Big Bang would be. Moreover, more Grand Emperors might still participate later. By the way, Grand Emperor of Annihilation, I saw Grand Emperor Igneous. Grand Emperor Igneous still dares to show himself? A trace of killing intent flashed across Lin Feng's eyes. Grand Emperor Igneous was good at plotting and knew when to advance or retreat. This kind of cultivator was the most difficult to deal with, and was far more threatening than Grand Emperor Gushi. If he allowed Grand Emperor Igneous to leave, Lin Feng would have to be careful at all times in the future. It would not be a good thing to be the target of a Grand Emperor lurking in the dark. That's right, he showed up. However, Grand Emperor Igneous disappeared the moment he showed up. He didn't even participate in the fourth wave of the Big Bang. Disappeared. Lin Feng sneered and continued. How would he dare to not disappear? If he continues to participate in the fourth wave of the Big Bang, when he meets us again, he won't have Grand Emperor Iridescence and Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss to help him anymore. Grand Emperor Igneous was ultimately a hidden threat. However, Lin Feng alone could not get rid of Grand Emperor Igneous now. He could only put the matter of Grand Emperor Igneous aside for now. If he could obtain more new materials, be they materials that could strengthen his combat body or the Starfell Pearl, Lin Feng's strength would improve rapidly. Let's go in and search for new substances first. Any later and we won't get anything. Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius immediately entered the cosmic tide again. In the fourth wave, the Grand Emperors fought with their lives. Although Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius had a tacit understanding, team-ups of 2 or 3 Grand Emperors were commonplace. Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius could not gain much of an advantage. There were a few times when Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius even encountered danger. Lin Feng had no choice but to expose his trump card and use the Void Traversal combat body to deal with those Grand Emperors so that they barely managed to survive. However, Grand Emperor Scorpius suffered heavy losses and was severely injured. Finally, the fourth wave of the Big Bang ended. Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius gained very little. They only obtained one new substance that could divide the cells of the combat body, as well as some materials. Grand Emperor Scorpius generously gave the new substance that could enable the division of combat body cells to Lin Feng. The new materials, on the other hand, went to Grand Emperor Scorpius. Relying on the new substance he obtained, Lin Feng's combat body improved further, but it only increased from 11.5 billion kilometers to 12 billion kilometers. The magnitude of improvement was really insignificant. The fourth wave of the Big Bang swept through an area of 1,000 light-years in the end. The area was enormous, and more than 20 Grand Emperors were fighting fiercely. Fortunately, the Grand Emperors had many life-saving trump cards, and they were all sufficiently prepared. A few of them were severely injured, but not a single Grand Emperor died. Could be considered a blessing among misfortunes. The 12 billion kilometer combat body seemed very strong. With the 1,000-fold enhancement of Lin Feng's advanced law, it was even more terrifying, and already surpassed ordinary Grand Emperors. But in reality, in the fourth wave of the Big Bang, ordinary Grand Emperors all formed teams. There were even some terrifying Grand Emperors whose combat bodies had reached 2 light-years. Moreover, they had all kinds of methods on top of their foundations, which rendered Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius unable to do anything. Grand Emperor Scorpius, your combat body is severely damaged. I'm afraid you won't be able to recover for a while. Lin Feng felt that it was a pity. His cooperation with Grand Emperor Scorpius was rather tacit, but there were too many Grand Emperors. Every Grand Emperor had a trump card, and one could be severely injured if they were not careful. This was the case for Grand Emperor Scorpius. Now that his combat body had been severely injured, he could no longer participate in the fifth wave of the Big Bang. There were also a few Grand Emperors who were severely injured, like Grand Emperor Scorpius. Grand Emperor of Annihilation, actually, you could have obtained more alone. Oh well. We already obtained enough new substances this time. It's impossible for me to participate in the fifth wave of the Big Bang anymore. Grand Emperor of Annihilation, you can only go alone. Lin Feng nodded. There was nothing he could do about it. If Grand Emperor Scorpius entered the fifth wave of the Big Bang, he would probably be in real danger. At this moment, Lin Feng did not stand on ceremony. He said in a low voice, "Grand Emperor Scorpius, go ahead and recuperate." Lin Feng was also bent on participating in the fifth wave of the Big Bang. He could not possibly pass up such an excellent opportunity, even if top-notch Grand Emperors might appear in the fifth wave. A so-called top-notch Grand Emperor had a combat body of more than 10 light-years. They had even comprehended ultimate planetary laws themselves. Only such Grand Emperors could be considered true top-notch Grand Emperors. A top-notch Grand Emperor like that was on a completely different level from ordinary Grand Emperors. He could kill them with a flip of his palm. Such a top-notch Grand Emperor had not participated in the fourth wave of the Big Bang, but top-notch Grand Emperors would definitely participate in the fifth or even sixth wave. If I were a bit stronger, I might not have to be so passive. Lin Feng shook his head inwardly. What a pity. His strength still had room for improvement. For example, he could still continue to transfer more planets into the Starfell Pearl. It might even be able to threaten grand emperors in the end. Unfortunately, Lin Feng did not have the time to transfer more planets now. However, by relying on the advanced law of space, Lin Feng was still qualified to participate in the fifth wave of the Big Bang. Rumble. The fifth wave of the Big Bang began. A mighty shockwave swept over, instantly sweeping through thousands of light-years, and finally reaching 10,000 light-years. The area of the fifth wave of explosions was 10 times larger than that of the fourth wave. Many grand emperors entered the area of 10,000 light-years, one after another. There were at least 50 of them, and there was no lack of top-notch grand emperors among them. Although it was very dangerous, Lin Feng still resolutely joined the fight for new substances in the fifth wave of the Big Bang. Swoosh! Lin Feng acted alone like a fish in water. His void traversal combat body had long been exposed. It was no longer a secret that he possessed the law of space. But so what? Even though most of the Grand Emperors knew, they were still unable to do anything to Lin Feng. The reason was very simple. They could not seal space. Even the top Grand Emperors would find it relatively difficult to seal space. The only exception was if there happened to be some artifact that could seal space. However, such a treasure must be very precious, and could not be obtained easily. Moreover, artifacts that could seal space were not of much use to cultivators under normal circumstances. No Grand Emperor would deliberately seek an artifact that sealed space. Lin Feng's void traversal combat body was extremely sensitive to space. As long as there were spatial fragments, he could even warp space and leave. In the wave of the Big Bang, the impact of the Big Bang basically shattered space, but it did not affect Lin Feng's void traversal combat body much. Apologies. This new substance is mine. Lin Feng grabbed the new substance. The three Grand Emperors could only watch helplessly as Lin Feng left. Even though they bellowed in anger, it was useless. Lin Feng warped through an area of 10,000 light-years. As long as a new substance was discovered, Lin Feng could basically seize it by force. Of course, he also encountered some danger, but Lin Feng relied on the void traversal combat body to avert danger in all these instances. All three new substances can divide cells. Lucky me. Lin Feng swallowed three new substances directly. These were all his spoils of war. Although the three new substances that divided the cells did not contain much chaotic power, they still improved Lin Feng's combat body somewhat. His combat body was far inferior to those true Grand Emperors, but it was precisely for this reason that these new substances could work on his combat body. Lin Feng did not miss any opportunity to increase his strength. After he swallowed the three new substances, the cells in his combat body quickly divided, and chaotic power filled all his cells. 12 billion kilometers, 13 billion kilometers, 14 billion kilometers, 15 billion kilometers. Each new substance increased Lin Feng's combat body by 1 billion kilometers, which meant 3 billion kilometers with three new substances. Hence, Lin Feng's combat body had already reached 15 billion kilometers. This growth speed was rather astonishing. In the beginning, when Lin Feng's combat body had the combat power of a Grand Emperor, his combat body was actually only approaching 10 billion kilometers and had not even reached 10 billion kilometers. Now, his combat body had actually increased by another 50%, reaching 15 billion kilometers. If it was enhanced by 1,000-fold, it would be 15 trillion kilometers. He was only slightly more than 3 trillion kilometers away from having the equivalent of a 2-light-year combat body. Now, Lin Feng could defeat most ordinary Grand Emperors just by relying on his combat body and the enhancement of laws. After all, most Grand Emperors had a 1-light-year combat body. There were very few Grand Emperors with a 2-light-year combat body or above. However, this was still not enough. Lin Feng was still far inferior to those top-notch Grand Emperors. As time passed, finally some Grand Emperors fell, and 3 of them fell at once. The 3 Grand Emperors fell together. The cosmos shook and the laws wailed. Almost all the Grand Emperors in the region of tens of thousands of light-years had already sensed it. 3 Grand Emperors have fallen. How is this possible? How intense was the competition? Even 3 Grand Emperors fell. The cosmos is shaking, and the laws are wailing. The fall of 3 Grand Emperors is definitely unusual. This fifth wave of the Big Bang is too brutal. many Grand Emperors felt a sense of lament. Every Grand Emperor had to experience hardships and even countless dangers before they were lucky enough to become a Grand Emperor by chance. The process of cultivation was indescribably difficult. In the entire vast universe, all those who eventually became Grand Emperors must have had a combination of talent, perseverance, and opportunities before they could eventually become a Grand Emperor. However, 3 of those who had struggled so hard to become Grand Emperors had fallen at the same time. This was a huge shock to all Grand Emperors. Lin Feng naturally sensed the lament of the laws as well. The deaths of the 3 Grand Emperors also shocked him. It could not be a coincidence that 3 Grand Emperors had fallen together. How strong must one be to be able to kill 3 Grand Emperors at once? Lin Feng's expression was solemn. If there was really such a Grand Emperor, they must be a top-notch Grand Emperor. To be able to make a top-notch Grand Emperor attack and kill 3 Grand Emperors, precious new substances must have appeared. Lin Feng gritted his teeth. Without any hesitation, he warped through space in the direction the 3 Grand Emperors had fallen. Lin Feng warped space. Almost in the blink of an eye, he had exited it. However, as soon as he stepped into the space, he saw a black new substance, similar to a black hole. Although it did not look very large, the chaotic energy inside was shockingly dense. Chaotic energy! Lin Feng had never felt such a rich chaotic energy. His eyes widened immediately. Huh! However, Lin Feng also noticed 2 huge eyes on the new substance. The combat body was incomparably terrifying. Even Lin Feng felt an immense pressure. Boom! There was a Grand Emperor and a top-notch one at that. The other party's palm struck towards Lin Feng with almost no hesitation. He was a top-notch Grand Emperor over 10 light-years in size, one of the strongest Grand Emperors who had comprehended the ultimate planetary law, Grand Emperor Universum. It's Grand Emperor Universum. Run! Lin Feng was shocked, and an infinite sense of danger arose in his heart. It was too dangerous. He was almost suffocating, and even felt as if he was drifting on the line between life and death. Ever since he had attained the combat power of a Grand Emperor, Lin Feng had never been in such a sorry state. But today, facing Grand Emperor Universum, who could be considered a top Grand Emperor in the entire universe, Lin Feng did not hesitate at all and directly warped space to escape. This was no joke. Lin Feng knew his own limitations when facing a top-notch Grand Emperor. Forget about the fact that his current combat body was not on par with those of 2 light-years. Even if he reached the level of 2 light-years or even 3 or 4 light-years, he was definitely still no match for Grand Emperor Universum. If he tried to face it head-on with the tidal combat body, he might not even be able to resist it. He could only run. Boom! With a palm strike from Grand Emperor Universum, even space was shattered. However, a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes, because he sensed that Lin Feng had already disappeared completely. Law of space. Grand Emperor Universum was one of the strongest Grand Emperors. His combat body exceeded 10 light-years in size. Lin Feng did not know how much it exceeded 10 light-years precisely. He only knew that he could not even withstand a casual palm strike from Grand Emperor Universum. Looks like it's the Grand Emperor of Annihilation who has risen to fame of recent. However, he's too weak. Grand Emperor Universum shook his head, not taking Lin Feng seriously at all. So what if he had the law of space? Would Lin Feng dare to appear in front of him? With just one strike, Grand Emperor Universum could kill Lin Feng. Just now, Grand Emperor Universum had already killed the 3 Grand Emperors with thunderous force. They were the first to discover this new substance, but Grand Emperor Universum showed no mercy and killed them directly. This was enough to show just how powerful Grand Emperor Universum was. That new substance. Lin Feng emerged from the space and looked at the new substance from afar. His face was ashen. With Grand Emperor Universum around, Lin Feng was also in a difficult position. If he was struck by Grand Emperor Universum, he would probably be severely injured, if not dead. However, the chaotic energy contained in that new substance was too rich, and could allow Lin Feng's combat body to reach a new level. Moreover, it was right in front of him. Lin Feng was really unwilling to give up just like that. I have to risk it. Lin Feng took a deep breath and finally made up his mind. His massive body burrowed into the spatial passage again and disappeared instantly. Retrieve. Grand Emperor Universum looked around and confirmed that no one was coming to compete with him anymore. On second thought, it made sense. He was a top-notch Grand Emperor. He had just killed 3 Grand Emperors and repelled the Grand Emperor of Annihilation, who possessed the law of space. Who would dare to come? Hence, even though they knew that this new substance was very miraculous, no one dared to step forward to compete with Grand Emperor Universum. This was what it truly meant to be peerless and renowned. Of course, even top-notch Grand Emperors had to deter others with actual actions. If Grand Emperor Universum had not killed the 3 Grand Emperors with thunderous force, causing the cosmos to shake and the laws to wail, he would probably have to deal with an endless stream of other Grand Emperors by now. Just as Grand Emperor Universum was about to seize the new substance, a huge hand suddenly appeared in the cosmos and grabbed the new substance before Grand Emperor Universum could. Grand Emperor of Annihilation, how dare you? Grand Emperor Universum was furious. He did not expect that the Grand Emperor of Annihilation would actually dare to come back and take the risk. He had even obtained the new substance before himself. Grand Emperor Universum mobilized his entire combat body and slapped down hard. Boom! Space shattered. Lin Feng was shocked. His void traversal combat body warped through the shattered space, as if it was enduring an enormous pressure. He could even feel the space behind him shatter like a mirror. Retrieve. Without any hesitation, Lin Feng immediately stored the new substance into the Starfell Pearl. At the same time, he used all his power to warp space. Lin Feng was luckier. Even though Grand Emperor Universum had shattered the surrounding space with a palm strike, Lin Feng had already warped into the spatial passage first. Once he began warping, it was practically teleportation. In the blink of an eye, Lin Feng had already warped an unknown distance away. Grand Emperor Universum was furious as he destroyed everything in a frenzy. Even the other Grand Emperors suffered for Grand Emperor Universum's anger. When a top-notch Grand Emperor was angered, even the cosmos would shake. Of course, Lin Feng did not intend to stay here anymore. The 5th wave of the Big Bang was almost already the limit of what Lin Feng could participate in. The 6th wave of the Big Bang would only be even more dangerous. Now that he had offended Grand Emperor Universum as well, Lin Feng did not dare to stay at the end of the universe anymore. He had to leave as soon as possible. However, his gains this time were fantastic. The chaotic energy contained in the new substance inside the Starfell Pearl shocked even Lin Feng. Once devoured, there was no knowing how much it could allow his combat body to divide. Just as Lin Feng was about to leave excitedly, everything around him suddenly seemed to still, including space. Lin Feng could even sense that Grand Emperor Universum and the other Grand Emperors around him seemed to have stopped moving all of a sudden. A slightly stiff expression appeared on their faces. Through space, Lin Feng saw a huge palm appear in the depths of the universe. It was overwhelming and probably covered thousands of light years. Even Lin Feng could not describe this palm. A strong sense of danger arose in the depths of his heart, but it was useless. The space had been locked, and even Lin Feng's combat body could not move. He was forcefully pinned in the spatial passage. A trace of fear also appeared on Grand Emperor Universum's face. He was a dignified, top-notch Grand Emperor, yet he actually felt a power that terrified him. This could only be a divine king. A divine king? No. Grand Emperor Universum tried to escape in a frenzy. The only one who could still struggle slightly now was Grand Emperor Universum. He erupted astonishing power, and even used his trump card. It was an all-shaped origin weapon, which transformed into a golden light. This sharpness gave Lin Feng a sense of suffocation. Lin Feng even sensed that once he was struck by this golden light, even his tidal combat body would probably be pulverized instantly. In other words, Grand Emperor Universum was entirely capable of killing Lin Feng with a single strike. However, this was Grand Emperor Universum's trump card, a life-saving method. He would not use it unless absolutely necessary. However, now that a divine king had intervened, With just a palm, the void was solidified, and the laws were frozen. All the Grand Emperors, including Grand Emperor Universum, had nowhere to run. Lin Feng was also desperately mobilizing the law of space, but it was still useless. The laws were frozen, and the void was also solidified. Once this huge palm slammed down, Lin Feng had no doubt that he would be shattered apart and reduced to cosmic dust. This was the first time Lin Feng had encountered such a helpless crisis since he entered the universe. The threat of death was imminent, yet Lin Feng could do nothing at all. In the past, even if there was danger, Lin Feng could still escape safely by relying on the law of space. But from the looks of it, the law of space was not that reliable. At the very least, there were still people who could do something to him and stop him from warping space to leave. I'm still too reliant on the law of space. Lin Feng's heart was filled with bitterness. Unknowingly, he had already become very reliant on the law of space. He had assumed that, with the law of space, he was invincible. But now, he was easily restrained by a palm from the Divine King. There was not even a chance of escape. One's own strength was the most important thing. Even laws were not omnipotent. Unfortunately, it was too late to realize it now. Lin Feng had obtained this new substance that contained rich chaotic energy, but he would also die for this new substance. With such abundant chaotic energy, it was no wonder that even a divine king was tempted and chose to act. Boom! This palm pressed down hard. The void was shattered, and everything fell silent. It was as if even the tides of the Big Bang had disappeared at once. Such was the might of a divine king. However, Lin Feng did not sense death. He looked up into the cosmos. At some point, another huge palm had appeared and blocked the terrifying palm of the divine king. He's not dead. Many grand emperors were stunned, but they reacted almost immediately. Flee! The grand emperors fled one after another, not daring to linger in the fifth wave of the Big Bang anymore. This was no joke. This was only the fifth wave of the Big Bang. Why were even divine kings attacking? It had to be known that the combat bodies of divine kings were all comparable to a galaxy. Under normal circumstances, it would be at least 100,000 light-years in size. How massive was this combat body? If the divine kings manifested their combat bodies, even the area of the fifth wave of the Big Bang could not accommodate the combat body of one divine king. However, a divine king had intervened, and his goal was that new substance that contained rich chaotic energy. Grand emperors were nothing in the eyes of a divine king. Even Grand Emperor Universum was fleeing in a frenzy. This was truly a narrow escape from death. How could he dare to linger here? Bamand, you were trying to stop me? Suddenly, a mighty voice sounded in the void. Divine King Bamand? Lin Feng was slightly stunned. He looked at the huge palm. Divine King Bamand had saved him? Divine King Qingguang, you're a dignified divine king. Yet you attacked a junior. Aren't you ashamed? Humph! Divine King Bamand, all these grand emperors are juniors. Why should I feel ashamed in a fair competition for opportunities? Divine King Qingguang, don't you know that the Grand Emperor of Annihilation you wanted to kill is a disciple of my Divine Palace of Bamand? Oh? Your Divine Palace of Bamand really had a huge gain then. Forget it. Since Divine King Bamand has spoken, I won't fight with these juniors. The cosmos fell silent. Then, the two huge palms disappeared, as if they had never existed. However, the shattered cosmos served as a constant reminder to all cultivators that everything that just happened was real. Lin Feng, leave quickly. It's best if you leave the Big Bang. The range of this Big Bang is very wide. Many old fellows are here. Even if it's the fifth wave of the Big Bang, the Divine Kings may interfere. Divine King Bamand's voice suddenly entered Lin Feng's ears. Lin Feng knew that Divine King Bamand had sent him a voice transmission to remind him of the danger here. Actually, even without Divine King Bamand's reminder, Lin Feng did not intend to continue participating. It was too dangerous. Even without the Divine King, he was not a match for a top-notch Grand Emperor like Grand Emperor Universum, let alone when a Divine King interfered. Thank you, Your Majesty. Lin Feng was also inwardly grateful. Divine King Bamond did not usually interfere, but once he did, it was critical. He had saved Lin Feng's life. Afterwards, Lin Feng no longer hesitated and warped space to leave. Swoosh! Lin Feng warped a few times in succession before finally exiting the area of the fifth wave of the Big Bang. It was tens of thousands of light-years. Even if Lin Feng warped at full speed, he would still need to warp several times before he could leave completely. Grand Emperor of Annihilation, how are you? Seeing Lin Feng appear, Grand Emperor Scorpius hurriedly came to him. Just now, I saw a huge palm that almost enveloped half the wave area. Simply terrifying. A divine king must have attacked, right? Lin Feng smiled weakly and nodded. That's right. A divine king attacked. It's Divine King Qingguang. Moreover, I was very unlucky. Divine King Qingguang's goal was the new substance I obtained. What? Scorpius was shocked. A divine king had actually attacked Lin Feng. So how did Lin Feng escape? That palm just now was too terrifying. Even if Lin Feng used spatial warp, he could travel hundreds of light-years at a time at most. But that palm covered a terrifying range of thousands of light-years. With a single palm strike, everything would be reduced to dust. Lin Feng had nowhere to run. It was Divine King Bamond of our Divine Palace of Bamond who helped. That's how I survived. Divine King Bamond? Grand Emperor Scorpius nodded. With Divine King Bamond's interference, Lin Feng would naturally be safe. Fortunately, the Divine King was there. However, this place is too dangerous. Look, even the Grand Emperors have left one after another. The 6th, 7th, and up until the 9th wave will all be the battlefield of the Divine Kings. Actually, the battlefield of the Divine Kings would only start from the 7th wave onwards. After all, even the 6th wave could only cover an area of about 100,000 light-years. It could only accommodate one Divine King's combat body completely. However, the Divine Kings had already intervened in the 5th wave, let alone the 6th. The battlefield of the Grand Emperors had actually ended in advance. That's right. Our battlefield is over. What are Grand Emperor Scorpius's plans next? Me? Of course, I'll return to the North River Galaxy to properly consume the spoils of war this time. After I've completely consumed them, my strength will definitely increase substantially. Grand Emperor Scorpius appeared very confident, but at the same time he was very happy. His gains this time were indeed huge, mainly because he had joined forces with Lin Feng. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have gained much by himself. I'm going to return to the Divine Palace of Bamond first, but I still have to ask Grand Emperor Scorpius for a favor. Grand Emperor of Annihilation, feel free to speak. Grand Emperor Scorpius has many friends. Please help me to keep an eye out for Grand Emperor Igneous. Grand Emperor Igneous was a hidden threat. Just because he had disappeared without a trace now did not mean that he had really disappeared for good. He might be plotting something in secret. Being targeted by a Grand Emperor while the other party hiding in the dark was not a good thing. No problem. Speaking of which, Grand Emperor Igneous probably hates me too. Of course we have to find him. Once I have any news on him, I'll inform Grand Emperor of Annihilation immediately. Grand Emperor Scorpius also felt that Grand Emperor Igneous was very dangerous. He was hiding in the dark, and no one knew what Grand Emperor Igneous was plotting. If one became mortal enemies with a Grand Emperor, they had to kill him at all costs. Otherwise, if they had to always remain on guard, oversights were inevitable and the consequences would be unthinkable. Thank you, Grand Emperor Scorpius. Lin Feng and Grand Emperor Scorpius looked at each other and smiled. Then, Grand Emperor Scorpius left. Lin Feng glanced at the mighty tides of the Big Bang in the distance. The 5th wave of the Big Bang had not ended yet, but to Lin Feng this Big Bang was actually already over. As for the remaining battles in the Big Bang, no matter how precious the new substances were, they had nothing to do with Lin Feng anymore. Next time, if there's a next time, I'll sweep through all 9 waves of the Big Bang. A bold thought flashed through Lin Feng's mind. If he really waited until the next Big Bang, it would be billions of years. Hence, Lin Feng's void traversal combat body immediately traversed space and warped towards the Bamond galaxy. In the cold and pitch-black cosmos, A huge planet spun slowly. There was no other planet around this huge planet. It was just a lonely planet. It was cold, dark, and did not even have the aura of life. Swoosh! After an unknown period of time, a figure descended on the planet. Gushi, we suffered a crushing defeat this time. You even lost your life. This figure was Grand Emperor Igneous. He seemed to be reminiscing all the happenings in his friendship with Grand Emperor Gushi back then. It was rumored that the two of them were close. In reality, they had already known each other back when they had yet to become planetary lifeforms. They roamed the universe together and metamorphosed into planetary lifeforms together. Gushi had a fiery temper and was prone to offending people. He had suffered many hardships in the past. However, Gushi appeared to be very lucky as well. He could often turn misfortunes into blessings and obtain many benefits. In comparison, Grand Emperor Igneous was very ordinary. He cultivated quietly, and his speed was far slower than Grand Emperor Gushi. Grand Emperor Gushi gifted many of the resources he obtained to Grand Emperor Igneous. Grand Emperor Igneous would never have attained his current achievements without Grand Emperor Gushi. Unfortunately, Grand Emperor Gushi was dead. He had died at the hands of the Grand Emperor of Annihilation, Lin Feng. Gushi, I've long advised you to rein in your fiery temper, yet you never listened. I knew that this day would come sooner or later, but I'll definitely avenge you. The law of space. I need an artifice that seals space. I'm not strong enough either, so I'll have to ask someone else to take action. Grand Emperor Igneous' expression was composed. Even though Grand Emperor Gushi was dead, even though his lifelong friend of billions of years was dead, he was still very composed. Yet, there was a monstrous killing intent in his composure. However, he was not in a hurry. The life of a Grand Emperor was infinite. He would not rush headlong into revenge. The passage of time was long. He needed to plan slowly. 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 or 10,000 years were nothing. Even if it took billions of years to make a plan, it was worth it as long as he could kill his enemy. Patience was the last thing Grand Emperor Igneous lacked. The divine palace of Bamand was very lively today. This was because it was the annual recruitment period for disciples in the lower district. Actually, recruiting annually was a little too frequent. Someone had once suggested recruiting once every 10 years. After all, if they recruited disciples every year, the lower district would be overflooding with disciples. There were already a lot of people. However, the Divine Palace had always recruited disciples annually. The reason was very simple. It did not matter how many disciples there were in the lower district. The Divine Palace of Bamand invested very little resources in the lower district to begin with. No matter how many people there were, it would not affect the distribution of resources in the middle and upper districts. Moreover, with more people, the competition would become even more intense. Those who could stand out in the lower district were all true geniuses. They had a chance of undergoing 6 life transitions and becoming planetary lifeforms. Moreover, there was a deeper reason for the Divine Palace of Bamand's method. They could all the factions in the Bamand galaxy to the Divine Palace. The reason was very simple. The lower district recruited disciples every year. Basically, some large and medium-sized factions in the Bamand galaxy, and even some small factions, had some recommendation qualifications. The only difference was how many people they recommended. As long as they could find a way to advance, their family, friends, or disciples would have a chance to enter the Divine Palace of Bamand. Then, they would naturally have a sense of belonging to the Divine Palace of Bamand. As time passed, the Bamand galaxy became highly united. Hence, although the Divine Palace of Bamand did not directly send disciples to actually manage the Bamand galaxy, its extraordinary status and control over the Bamand galaxy were definitely considerable. Xiao Tian, after you enter the Divine Palace of Bamand, you must work hard to cultivate and become a disciple of the Middle District, or even the Upper District. Lingguang, you are the most outstanding royal descendant of our Ling family. Once you make some contributions to the Divine Palace of Bamand, it will be much better than inheriting the position of emperor. What our Ling family relies on to rule over dozens of planets is not bloodline, but strength. The Divine Palace is the supreme holy land of the Bamand galaxy. Entering this place itself is an opportunity. Many elders were reminding the juniors that being able to enter the Divine Palace of Bamand, even the lower district, was an opportunity. Although the competition was somewhat fierce, and they had to enter the fiercest of competitions with geniuses throughout the galaxy, everyone in the universe must face competition. The weak were prey to the strong in the universe to begin with. Only the strong had the right to speak. Without the protection of the Divine Palace of Bamand, there was no knowing how chaotic the Bamand galaxy would be with so many major and minor factions. Perhaps a powerful faction today would be reduced to cosmic dust tomorrow. Competition was not frightening. What was frightening was failing to defeat others and winding up always inferior to others, never able to stand out. These young cultivators were all filled with longing, as if the Divine Palace of Bamand was their hope. However, in the eyes of the planetary disciples in charge of recruiting disciples in the lower district, less than 1 in 100 of these cultivators filled with longing and anticipation might succeed in the end. In fact, even all of them might fail. There were very few who could advance to the middle district, let alone the upper district. Buzz, buzz. Suddenly, traces of spatial ripples appeared in the void outside the Divine Palace. There were no protective arrays in the Divine Palace of Bamand, because it was completely unnecessary. As long as Divine King Bamand was standing, the Divine Palace of Bamand was absolutely safe. If a Divine King attacked the Divine Palace of Bamand, even arrays would be useless. Hence, arrays were completely superfluous to the Divine Palace. Now, spatial ripples appeared and spread majestically. A terrifying aura emitted from within. Who is it? Spatial warp? Which cultivator with powerful spatial innate ability has descended into our Divine Palace of Bamand? What a terrifying aura! Everyone was frightened. Suddenly, a hand stretched out of the space. Swoosh! Lin Feng emerged from the space at once. He had long retracted his combat body. Otherwise, how could planet Bamand withstand a combat body of 12 billion kilometers? Even so, his appearance still shocked everyone. Spatial warp was not something an ordinary cultivator could do. In the entire Divine Palace of Bamand, even in the upper district, no one could comprehend the law of space, let alone warp space. Isn't he a disciple of our Divine Palace? Shock appeared in the eyes of all the major and minor factions. However, the planetary disciple's eyes widened all of a sudden, and he suddenly took a step forward. Your Highness Lin Feng. Lin Feng nodded. This was an upper district disciple of the Divine Palace, but he did not know the disciple. He merely nodded slightly and entered the Divine Palace directly. Those who were preparing to send their descendants and relatives into the Divine Palace were all a little surprised by Lin Feng's disrespectful attitude. From their perspective, they were both planetary disciples and upper district disciples. How could this new cultivator actually dare to disregard other upper district disciples like this? However, the disciple who went forward to welcome him did not mind at all. He shook his head and said, "You may not know this, but His Highness Lin Feng has a title." Title? Everyone was surprised. Even advanced planetary lifeforms did not have titles, right? His Highness Lin Feng's title is Grand Emperor of Annihilation. Grand Emperor? Everyone's eyes widened. A Grand Emperor? He was actually a Grand Emperor, the strongest beings among planetary cultivators. Apart from the Divine Kings, he was already standing at the top of the universe, invincible in the cosmos. Moreover, they could sense that Lin Feng's life aura seemed to be very young. The younger he was, the greater his potential. No one knew how much further he could grow in the future. These people were not the only ones who were surprised. In fact, the planetary disciple who was welcoming them was also very surprised. He was very well informed. He actually knew about the Big Bang, but he was not qualified to participate in such a grand event. However, someone had long sent back news that a formidable individual had appeared in the Divine Palace of Bamand. His name was the Grand Emperor of Annihilation. He had killed a Grand Emperor as a venerable. Not only did he challenge an opponent above his level and possess the combat power of a Grand Emperor, he even killed a genuine Grand Emperor, This was simply incredible. The glorious battle record of the Grand Emperor of Annihilation had also spread throughout the entire upper district of the Divine Palace of Bamand. The name of the Grand Emperor of Annihilation was already very famous. This was simply an incomparably ruthless individual, ferocious to the extreme. Lin Feng finally returned to his residence in the upper district. Along the way, he encountered some disciples of the upper district. However, it was strange. When these disciples saw him, it was as if they saw some monstrous catastrophe. All of them became incomparably respectful. There was even some fear in their respect, which puzzled Lin Feng. Even if they know that I've become a Grand Emperor, they don't have to be so afraid, right? Lin Feng stroked his chin and shook his head helplessly. Of course, Lin Feng did not know why. Grand Emperors naturally would not make the disciples of the upper district fearful. At most, they would only be respectful. However, Lin Feng was an incomparably ruthless individual who had killed a Grand Emperor as a venerable. Moreover, it sounded like he had dared to kill a Grand Emperor merely over verbal disagreements between him and Emperor Gushi. Such a frightening reputation had already spread throughout the Divine Palace. Who wouldn't be afraid of such an incomparably ruthless individual that would kill a Grand Emperor over the slightest disagreement? Master, you're finally back. As soon as he returned to the house, Longbetham's voice sounded. Although Longbetham had created a tool that was worn by Lin Feng at all times, Longbetham's true form could only obtain information intermittently through some contact methods. However, messages could not be transmitted in certain places, such as the Big Bang. In such an environment, no matter how advanced the technology, messages could not be transmitted. Master, I heard that you have already become a Grand Emperor? Longbetham was very thrilled. A Grand Emperor. It did not even dare to imagine that one day, it could actually become the follower of a Grand Emperor. Back then, it had judged that Lin Feng would be hard-pressed to even become an elementary planetary life form, let alone a Grand Emperor. Unexpectedly, Lin Feng's speed of cultivation along the way stunned Longbetham. Lin Feng smiled and did not conceal it. He said directly, I'm still a venerable and an advanced planetary life form, but by relying on my comprehension of laws, I do have the combat power of a Grand Emperor. Actually, Lin Feng did not just have the combat power of a Grand Emperor. Even ordinary Grand Emperors were not as powerful as Lin Feng. Haha, I, Longbetham, have really become the follower of a Grand Emperor. This is simply wonderful. Longbetham really felt proud. How many people could become the followers of a Grand Emperor, and as mechanical life forms at that? There were probably very few. Some Grand Emperors in the upper district of the Divine Palace did not choose mechanical life forms as their followers. But now, there would be another mechanical life form among the followers of Grand Emperors in the upper district of the Divine Palace. By the way, Longbetham, on my way back this time, I encountered some upper district disciples. Why do I feel that the way they look at me is a little strange? It's as if aside from reverence, there's more fear in it. Lin Feng was certain that aside from reverence, there was more of a trace of fear in the gazes of those upper district disciples. Fear. Longbetham was slightly stunned, but after it thought carefully, its eyes lit up. Master, I believe I know why they are afraid. Why? The news of Master becoming a Grand Emperor had already arrived. I know that. Lin Feng did not even conceal it. He used spatial warp to return directly. This was because he had become a Grand Emperor, and his reputation had spread everywhere during the Big Bang. There was no longer any point in keeping it a secret. He would not be able to keep it secret even if he tried, so he might as well make it public. In any case, with his current strength, could anyone actually interrogate him? Master, did you also kill Grand Emperor Gushi? That's right. I did kill Grand Emperor Gushi. Is that the only reason? This is most likely the reason. According to the rumors I heard, Grand Emperor Gushi argued with Master a little and Master killed him in a fit of anger. Now, Master's ruthless reputation has spread throughout the entire upper district of the Divine Palace. Due to our association, even when I go out, no one dares to provoke me anymore. How magnificent! Longbetham was enjoying the power, but Lin Feng could only smile helplessly on the inside. What unparalleled, ruthless reputation. Was he that savage? Lin Feng felt very helpless. He had killed Grand Emperor Gushi over just a slight quarrel? Although that appeared to be the case on the surface, the reason was actually much more complicated. Originally, Lin Feng had mocked that Grand Emperor Gushi was Grand Emperor Windbag. It was precisely due to this statement that there was no longer any room for reconciliation between Grand Emperor Gushi and Lin Feng. How dangerous would it be if a Grand Emperor secretly bore a grudge? This was especially the case in an environment as complicated as the Big Bang. Hence, for his own safety, Lin Feng might as well join forces with Grand Emperor Scorpius to kill Grand Emperor Gushi and eliminate future troubles. However, he did not expect the rumors to spread that he had killed Grand Emperor Gushi just because Grand Emperor Gushi had angered him due to a slight quarrel. Even Lin Feng himself found it unbelievable. However, this way, Lin Feng's ruthless reputation naturally spread. Even in the divine palace of Bamond, who would dare to provoke him? Who wouldn't be afraid? If he could kill a Grand Emperor in a fit of anger, he could also kill others in a fit of anger. Forget it. Ruthless reputation it is. Lin Feng shook his head. It would probably be very difficult for him to reverse everyone's impression of him. By the way, how many Grand Emperors are there in the upper district at the moment? Lin Feng asked Longbetham. Master, I have not obtained the authority yet. Lin Feng was a little disappointed. He knew about Longbetham's authority. In the upper district, every disciple's follower had the corresponding authority. Right now, Longbetham only had the most basic authority. It did not know much about the upper district, or even the entire divine palace of Bamond. Above that was the authority of the Venerables, which was slightly better than the basic authority. However, the authority of Grand Emperors was still the best. The authority of every Grand Emperor's follower allowed them to know all the information and secrets of the divine palace. Hence, some said that Grand Emperors were actually above the category of disciples, and could assist the Divine King in managing the entire divine palace. Although Lin Feng was notorious now, and had the combat power of a Grand Emperor, as Divine King Bamond had yet to return, it had not promoted Lin Feng's authority. Lin Feng was not in a hurry to promote his authority. He went straight to the cosmos and used his combat body. The massive combat body was a total of 12 billion kilometers. It was far inferior to a Grand Emperor's combat body, but countless times stronger than a Venerable's combat body. Such a huge commotion immediately attracted the attention of many upper district disciples. That's the Grand Emperor of Annihilation, right? Everyone says that the Grand Emperor of Annihilation has the ability to challenge opponents above his level. I had thought it was just a rumor, but now it seems to be true. This must be a combat body of over 10 billion kilometers, right? Venerable. This is indeed just a venerable. However, a venerable with such a powerful combat body is unheard of. No wonder he's comparable to a Grand Emperor. Lin Feng's use of the combat body also alarmed some Grand Emperors among the disciples of the upper district. They looked at Lin Feng's combat body with complicated expressions, but no one said anything. The news about Lin Feng had long spread throughout the upper district of the Divine Palace. Almost everyone knew that another Grand Emperor was born in the Divine Palace. Of course, Lin Feng did not deploy the combat body to show off. It was not easy for him to obtain a new substance that contained chaotic energy. Now was naturally the time to use this new substance to improve his combat body. Hence, Lin Feng retrieved the new substance. It was even larger than a star. Devour! Although this new substance was huge and comparable to a star, forget about one star, even 10 stars were nothing in Lin Feng's eyes. He could devour them at will. When the new substance appeared, the Grand Emperors of the upper district all had excited looks. What a rich, chaotic energy. Grand Emperor of Annihilation gained a lot from the Big Bang. Alas, unfortunately, we gained nothing. Many Grand Emperors were very envious of Lin Feng's gains, but if they were really asked to risk their lives, all of them would probably back down. Some Grand Emperors were willing to take risks, while some were already content with their current state. After all, Not every Grand Emperor was so ambitious as to wish to advance further to become a divine king. Lin Feng opened his mouth and swallowed this new substance containing rich chaotic power in one gulp. Boom! It was as if a bomb had detonated in Lin Feng's body with a bang. His combat body cells were all filled with power. It was abnormal energy, chaotic power. However, it did not feel out of place at all, and did not repel the cells in his body at all. A large amount of chaotic power filled Lin Feng's entire body. It felt as if he had returned to his mother's womb, warm and peaceful. What kind of power was chaotic power? In the past, Lin Feng had rarely come into contact with it. Even though he had devoured many new substances, the chaotic power contained in them was actually not much. Now, this new substance contained dense chaotic power that filled Lin Feng's entire body. Moreover, this was completely abnormal energy, but it was not rejected by his cells at all. Instead, it felt very intimate, like he had returned to his mother's womb. Unknowingly, Lin Feng's combat body cells were already constantly dividing. Moreover, with every division, the chaotic power would provide sufficient energy. Divide, divide, divide again. Lin Feng's combat body also soared rapidly from 15 billion kilometers. 15 billion kilometers, 16 billion kilometers, 17 billion kilometers. Almost every second, Lin Feng's combat body would expand by 1 billion kilometers. The division of the combat body cells was all supported by chaotic energy. Lin Feng did not feel his limit because his limit was still very, very far away. 18 billion kilometers, 20 billion kilometers, 22 billion kilometers, 24 billion kilometers. In the end, Lin Feng's combat body almost divided by one-fold. After reaching 24 billion kilometers, it gradually slowed down and finally stopped at 28 billion kilometers. The 28 billion kilometer combat body stretched out in the void. The chaotic power in Lin Feng's body had also disappeared without a trace, and could no longer support the division of his cells. If such a huge combat body was enhanced by another thousandfold, it would be equivalent to a combat body of about 28 trillion kilometers or 3 light-years. A combat body of 3 light-years was enough to crush ordinary Grand Emperors. Although it was far from the level of a top-notch Grand Emperor, combined with Lin Feng's 3 combat bodies and 3 advanced laws, it would not be difficult for him to kill a Grand Emperor himself. Only at this point could Lin Feng truly pose a threat to even Grand Emperors. However, even though his combat body was already so strong, Lin Feng still had not seen the path to consummation. In other words, he had yet to find a clear path to cultivate the consummate combat body at the venerable level. Lin Feng was not in a hurry. He knew that advancing from the venerable level to the Grand Emperor level was a very long process of accumulation in itself. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the gap between the two was a natural chasm. Even top-notch venerables only had combat bodies of 50 to 60 million kilometers in size. Those who could reach 100 million kilometers could be counted on one hand. How could they compare to Grand Emperors? Once one became a Grand Emperor, a mere combat body of tens of millions of kilometers would increase by more than 100,000 times. A 100,000-fold increase was already beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Even if an elementary planetary life form underwent 6 to 7 life transitions and metamorphosed into an advanced planetary life form, the combat body of an ordinary cultivator would only increase by 100-fold. Of course, Lin Feng was an exception. He had improved so much due to various reasons. Ordinary cultivators basically saw an increase of 100 or 1,000 times. They would definitely not reach something as absurd as 100,000 times. Only the gap between an advanced planetary life form and an ultimate planetary life form would be so huge. It was like an insurmountable chasm. This was also why there were so many venerables in the universe but very few Grand Emperors. There was such a huge gap between a venerable and a Grand Emperor. Whether Lin Feng wanted to become a Grand Emperor directly, or had ambitions to continue cultivating the consummate combat body, he was destined to be immersed in this stage for a long time. Or rather, it would take a very long time to accumulate. After all, this stage itself required years of accumulation. It might take 100 years, 1,000 years, or even 10,000 years. Even Lin Feng himself did not know if he could improve further. However, even in 10,000 years, Lin Feng would still be considered one of the youngest among Grand Emperors. Unfortunately, after this, without the Big Bang, it won't be so easy to obtain chaotic power and use it to improve my combat body again. Lin Feng also knew his current situation very well. Although he seemed to be improving at a miraculous speed that could not be judged with common sense, in reality, he was benefiting from the Big Bang. Lin Feng had coincidentally acquired a lot of things from the Big Bang. It would be impossible for him to improve so quickly in the future. With Lin Feng's current combat body, ordinary cosmic miraculous items would probably be useless on Lin Feng's combat body. Your Highness Lin Feng. Just as the metamorphosis of Lin Feng's combat body ended, an unfamiliar voice sounded. Lin Feng turned around and realized that it was a disciple of the upper district. Although Lin Feng did not recognize him, the aura on the other party was extraordinary. He was probably a Grand Emperor. Master. This is His Highness Long Yuan, the strongest Grand Emperor of the Divine Palace. Long Yuan. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. Only Long Yuan could be called the strongest Grand Emperor in the Divine Palace. Although the names of Grand Emperor Long Yuan and Grand Emperor Dragon Abyss differed by only one word, there was a world of difference between the two individuals. Grand Emperor Long Yuan was a top-notch Grand Emperor, almost on par with Grand Emperor Universum, and stood at the peak of the universe. Lin Feng had nothing to be proud of in front of such a top-notch Grand Emperor. Your Highness Long Yuan, why are you looking for me? His Majesty requests your Highness's presence. Oh, the Divine King has finally returned. Lin Feng was shocked. He carefully calculated the time. When he swallowed that new substance previously, it actually took a full month for his combat body to divide again. During this month, Lin Feng knew nothing about the outside world. At this thought, Lin Feng also felt some lingering fear. If he had been immersed in cell division for a month in the outside world, who knew what would have happened? Of course, if someone interrupted the division of Lin Feng's combat body, Lin Feng would definitely wake up. Thank you, Your Highness Long Yuan. Long Yuan nodded as well, accepting Lin Feng's gratitude openly. He was indeed the one who asked people not to disturb Lin Feng previously. Otherwise, Lin Feng's improvement would not have gone so smoothly this time. Go. His Majesty the Divine King thinks very highly of you. He's probably going to elevate your authority this time. Lin Feng nodded. When Divine King Bamand returned, he would definitely look for Lin Feng immediately. After all, Lin Feng had been in the limelight during the Big Bang. A Grand Emperor had been born in the Divine Palace, and it was not an ordinary Grand Emperor. Even Divine King Bamand would take this matter seriously. Lin Feng did not delay any longer. He retracted his combat body and rushed towards the Divine King Palace. Looking at Lin Feng's departing back, Long Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly. A smile appeared on his lips as he muttered in a low voice. Another Grand Emperor has finally been born. Perhaps I can relax somewhat in the future. Then, Long Yuan also took a step forward. If Lin Feng were here, he would definitely be very surprised, for Long Yuan had actually disappeared without a trace in an instant, and there was a faint spatial fluctuation. Lin Feng stepped into the Divine King Palace again. As soon as he entered, Lin Feng felt a terrifying pressure. He looked up at the massive combat body in the cosmos with his mental power. Without a doubt, that was the combat body of Divine King Bamand. In the past, when Lin Feng first met Divine King Bamand, he had only seen an avatar manifested from one of Divine King Bamand's cells. Lin Feng did not have a specific concept of how strong the Divine King's true form was. He could only sense that it was very, very strong. Now, after experiencing the Big Bang, Lin Feng had also become the famous Grand Emperor of Annihilation himself. He had the combat power of a Grand Emperor. Hence, he could clearly sense how powerful Divine King Bamand's combat body was now. It was so powerful that it made one despair. Lin Feng could not imagine how such a powerful combat body could exist in this world. Even a Grand Emperor was only an ant before a Divine King, and a slightly stronger ant at most. Grand Emperor Universum dominated the universe and was one of the top Grand Emperors. But so what? With a casual palm strike from Divine King Qingguang, he fled in a panic, and it was even impossible for him to escape. If Divine King Bamand had not blocked Divine King Qingguang's palm strike, all the Grand Emperors, including Grand Emperor Universum, would have died. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Lin Feng bowed respectfully. The other party was not only the Divine King, but also his nominal master. Of course, it was only nominal. Lin Feng felt more respectful than close around Divine King Bamand. "Lin Feng, haha, you're the dignified Grand Emperor of Annihilation now. There's no need to stand on ceremony." The Divine King was very forthright and looked very happy. He had probably gained a lot from this Big Bang. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in such a good mood. "Your Majesty, why are you looking for me?" "Lin Feng, if I'm not wrong, you transformed into an advanced planetary life form with a planetary consummate combat body, right?" Lin Feng nodded. In reality, the moment he possessed the combat power of a Grand Emperor, many people had already guessed that it. This was no secret. A planetary consummate combat body. I've strived hard for it back then, but unfortunately I didn't succeed. However, a planetary consummate combat body isn't enough for you to be on par with a Grand Emperor as a venerable. Your laws have also reached the advanced planetary level, right? "Your Majesty is wise." Lin Feng did not say much. Even though this was no longer a secret, he was very cautious. After all, he had relied on the sacred stone of anathema to comprehend his laws. Lin Feng still had not figured out what the sacred stone of anathema was, but it must be a supreme treasure that could drive even divine kings and divine venerables to madness. Even though Lin Feng trusted Divine King Bamand a lot after this Big Bang, he would never expose the secret of the sacred stone of anathema. Divine King Bamand looked deeply at Lin Feng and heaved a long sigh. A planetary consummate combat body and advanced planetary laws. That's right, you actually have 3 laws, and one of them is the rare law of space. In the past, I've always felt that the Divine Palace had no successor. Now, it seems like good fortune has finally come upon our Divine Palace of Bamand. A genius like you has actually appeared. The seeds I casually scattered back then can be considered to have blossomed now. Divine King Bamand was very gratified. Lin Feng was a seed disciple, and he had relied on himself to return to the Divine Palace of Bamand. Apart from some basic resources, the Divine Palace of Bamand had not given Lin Feng much help. Lin Feng had relied on his own hard work to get to where he was today. Of course, the Divine Palace was still very important. Without the Divine Palace, Lin Feng might not learn about the Big Bang. Even in the most conservative scenario, if not for the Divine Palace of Bamand and Divine King Bamand, Lin Feng would probably have been killed by Divine King Qingguang with a single palm strike the last time he snatched the new substance from Grand Emperor Universum. It was Divine King Bamand who lent aid and saved Lin Feng's life. Hence, Lin Feng was very respectful towards Divine King Bamand, and was also very grateful deep down. "I gained a lot in the Big Bang this time, but no matter how great my gains are, they cannot compare to the emergence of a top genius like you in the Divine Palace. Lin Feng, now that you have the combat power of a Grand Emperor, you are a true Grand Emperor. Your authority will be promoted to a level second only to mine. Basically, you have the right to know everything about the Divine Palace, big or small." "Thank you, Your Majesty." "That is not all." A smile appeared on Divine King Bamand's face. He continued, "Becoming a Grand Emperor is both an honor and a duty. The Divine Palace of Bamand has stood tall in the Bamand Galaxy for so many years, and ensured the overall peace of the Bamand Galaxy. There is a price for it." "Price?" Lin Feng knew that the main point was coming. Divine King Bamand had probably summoned him alone for more than just a few words of praise. "That's right, a price. The universe is filled with danger everywhere, and the Bamand Galaxy is no exception. On the other side of the Bamand Galaxy is the Silent Galaxy. Perhaps you have never heard of this galaxy, because it is too ancient, and not very suitable for cultivation. It is a dead, cold, dark, and dangerous galaxy. The border between the Bamand Galaxy and the Silent Galaxy is a meat grinder. All kinds of monsters often appear in the Silent Galaxy. They do not have much intelligence, but they seem to be born with a thirst for destruction. The strongest ones are even comparable to grand emperors. We call them the silent beasts. All these years, many grand emperors of our divine palace of Bamand have gone to the border to suppress the cosmos and guard the border. Silent beasts are killed the moment they appear. Not a single silent beast can enter the Bamand galaxy. Lin Feng listened very carefully, but when he heard about the silent galaxy, his heart skipped a beat. Not only had he heard of the silent galaxy before, in a way he was even very familiar with it. This was because the Void Sky Divine Pearl he had obtained was the treasure of Divine Emperor Void Sky, and the Void Sky Divine Palace left behind by Divine Emperor Void Sky was in the silent galaxy. Originally, Lin Feng had wanted to find a time to use the intelligence channels of the Divine Palace of Bamand to investigate the exact location of the silent galaxy. Unexpectedly, he had now obtained the location of the silent galaxy from Divine King Bamand by chance. It was so far away, yet so close the whole time. It turned out that the silent galaxy was adjacent to the Bamand galaxy. This was really a windfall that came after searching futilely far and wide. It felt like someone had delivered a pillow to him right when he was feeling drowsy. However, this silent galaxy seemed to be different from how Lin Feng had imagined it. Your Majesty, you want me to guard the border? Lin Feng also roughly understood Divine King Bamand's intention. That's right. I want you to guard the border. Actually, it's not just you. The Grand Emperors of my Divine Palace of Bamand and some top-notch venerables will also guard the border. Since those beasts are so difficult to deal with and so threatening, why has Your Majesty the Divine King not personally swept through these silent beasts? Although Lin Feng really wanted to go to the silent galaxy, he was not in a hurry. He had to understand the situation of this silent galaxy first. Divine King Bamand's expression was solemn. He shook his head and said, "There's no way to sweep through them. I've also ventured deep into the silent galaxy before, but this is a very strange place. There are many forces inside that even I feel threatened by. Moreover, I cannot find the lair of those monsters. It seems like the silent galaxy can naturally give birth to those monsters. Besides our Bamand galaxy, all the galaxies adjacent to the silent galaxy are guarded by experts. You just need to pay attention and not go deep into the silent galaxy. It's too dangerous inside." At the mention of the danger of the silent galaxy, even Divine King Bamand seemed to have a lingering fear. Moreover, there was a faint glint in his eyes. There might be some other hidden situations, but Divine King Bamand did not elaborate. This undoubtedly made Lin Feng even more cautious. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone.